the general ontological scenery, if you will, that isn't both prior to and logically sufficient for our action. And I think we can do that actually with divine simplicity, and there's some good work on that. Maybe we'll get there, maybe we won't, right? But if you're a libertarian and like you have deep libertarian intuitions with free will, which I did.
Just kind of like break this down for us a little bit more. For those who are watching and they're like, wait, all that just went past me a little too quickly. It sounds like you're saying if you're an atheist, if you're a materialist at least,
right,
you have to deny free will. Just kind of lay that argument out.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, the idea is that if we're reducing things to the mere physical order, then say you have the laws of nature, and then some just event A plus B plus C, and then eventually you come along, right? Well, the idea is that you and everything about you is somehow inextricably linked to those prior factors, which are also logically sufficient for you, your beliefs, your actions, whatsoever. So if that's your metaphysics, I don't see how you're really getting around determinism, which is why many atheists, not all, but many, embrace determinism, right? They accept in fact, we brought up Sam Harris. He's pretty staunch on determinism.
Okay, thanks.
And, no, I don't know if that makes sense.
No, it does make sense, absolutely. I just think it's helpful for people. One of the things, again, back to Dr. Glenn Lane Craig, in his interview with Alex O'Connor, I'm not sure if you watched that episode. I had Alex debate Trent on the channel about a year and a half ago. Yeah, what's that?
I only watch your podcast.
I appreciate that. But you should watch this one because, Alex O'Connor's, he studies at Oxford. He's a very bright young man, and Cosmic Skeptic is the name of his channel.
Yes, yeah.
And he's got like 300,000, 400,000, 500,000 YouTube followers. And he had Dr. Craig on. And he's a very open-minded guy. And Craig did incredibly well. Like, just helped him understand a lot of things. Craig's unreal.
Yeah.
But one of the things Craig said was, part of his tactic as a theistic apologist is to give the atheist a price tag for his atheism that's going to cost more than he's willing to pay.
Right.
And that's sort of what you were talking about.
I think that's exactly what happened to me, right? There were certain things where, as I was going deeper into this particular worldview, there were costs associated with them. And at some point, the cost became too much to bear. And I didn't immediately have to becoming a Catholic by any means, but it caused me to want to look at alternatives more seriously.
Okay, see, that's a good way to think of it. Because if you had have stopped there, it would have just been, okay, well, these things make you uncomfortable, therefore they're false. That doesn't follow.
Yeah, no, I remember, like, there was a point, I remember quite vividly, I was sitting in my attic where I was just like, I had a book in my hand, I forget what it was, but I had just reached a point in just my atheistic thinking where I'm like, I don't know what's true. I don't know if this is true. I don't think it's true. But I'm going to keep searching until I figure something out.
Right.
Or throw myself off a bridge.
This is similar to my experience. Like, my point, it wasn't that... Because I saw a pretty grim universe and reality ahead of me and around me, should atheism be true. That's not a good argument for theism being true. But it did make me want to question, as you just put it, well, maybe I should look into these alternatives a little more seriously to see if there's if they have any gas.
Heft.
Yeah, that's kind of what you were doing. Okay.
Right.
So what did you look to first?
The classics. Go back to Plato, Aristotle.
Oh, no, okay. Philosophy. Okay, I didn't know if you kind of jumped into different world religions.
No, I mean, religion was not on the table for me at all.
Okay.
Like, I would say I would probably be open to the idea of, like, a god in the most general sense, right? A deism or pantheism. So I really kind of ran the gamut, right? So as I moved away from atheism and kind of like closer to Catholicism, I went through the whole spiritual but not religious phase, right? So I was reading like Aldous Huxley, right, and the perennial philosophy and religious pluralists, really, right? And that seemed plausible to me. At first, as I dove deeper into it, I realized it wasn't going to work. Especially not like what we call like a naive religious pluralism, and say like religions are all just saying the same thing. They definitely aren't, right? They say quite radically different things. Or you could take a more sophisticated view, which says something like, okay, religions are definitely saying different things. Yeah. And they're all wrong, but they're also kind of right. They're all kind of groping at the same ultimate reality. That was attractive to me. It was attractive to me, and that opened me up. And I just parked there for a while, honestly, and I was just reading a lot of philosophy and different thinkers of that sort.
But that's cool that you were reading Plato.
Right.
I mean, if I were an atheist, I don't know. I think I'd make a religion out of Plato. I just love Socrates.
You could just be a Platonist, right? Well, I mean, it's interesting because I had your introduction to these thinkers at other times. Your basic intro to philosophy courses and stuff like that. But I just never spent a lot of time with them. So I decided I want to go back.
But what I was referring to, though, was Socrates in prison, where his friends try to rescue him. And he says, look, what's the problem? If he doesn't say this exactly, but if the afterlife exists, then it sounds rather pleasant. And if it doesn't, then I suppose it'll be like going into a dreamless sleep.
Right,
and who doesn't want that?
It's funny, my philosophy professor brought that up one time, and I challenged her on it. I'm like, is that really the only alternatives there? Like, what if there's a hell? What if
it's absolutely awful?
What if you get reincarnated, right?
Yeah,
It seems like you might be leaving out some options, right? That are worth considering. So, with all respect to Plato, of course. But no, so I mean, you just go and you start reading different perspectives, and I was doing that from many different angles. Somehow, eventually, I forget how, I stumbled upon the Thomistic tradition.
Prior to being a Christian?
I was a Thomist before I was a Catholic.
Yeah. And a Christian?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And not just Aquinas himself, but like many of the sort of contemporary Thomistic thinkers were very impressive to me. Father Norris Clark, for example, he was a big influence. The existential Thomists. This was the school that I was very much drawn to.
Yeah.
Bernard Lonergan.
Yep.
When I hit those guys, there was just a ring of beauty and truth to the way that they were describing the world, and it checked boxes for me.
Did you encounter any of their sort of existentialist arguments for God's existence from the sort of Thomist lens?
Right. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Of
like
course.
the mind is made for truth, and if truth doesn't exist, then individual truths don't satisfy.
Right. Yeah. So in Clark, that's his inner path. Right. Clark's kind of got the inner path. The mind is kind of hunting for truth. Yeah. It reaches a set of limits. It enjoys it, whatever those limits are, for a little bit, and then it rebounds, right? Yeah. It rebounds, and either it's going to be infinite frustration, or we're going to come to rest in the unlimited, the absolute, right? And I think, if I remember rightly, Clark says, like, yeah, this isn't a deductive proof, but it's suggestive. It's definitely suggestive. And then he's got his argument, if I remember right. It's a two-step, right? That there has to be at least one necessary reality, something that's uncaused, in the totality of reality, right? Because there's no cause that can exist outside of it, right?
That's right.
So in the collection of all that is real, there has to be at least one.
Yeah.
I like the term unconditioned reality, because if everything's conditioned, then it stands in a dependency relation, things outside itself. Yeah. And if that's the case for everything, whether it's finite or infinite,
it can't be turtles all the way down.
The fulfillment of those conditions can never be achieved in principle, so it'd be nothing. So that's like his first step. And then his second step is to argue whatever else that fundamental uncaused reality is, it has to be a pure act of existing through itself. And why is that, he thinks? He thinks that it has to be, it has to be actual, right? Because if it's not, then it would have to be caused, and it's conditioned. That's a contradiction, because we already said it has to be uncaused. And if it exists in virtue of something else, same thing, caused, conditioned, that's a contradiction. So it has to be pure. It has to be a pure act of existing through itself. So there can be no part or feature or dimension to it that was different from it. Otherwise, you have a caused, uncaused reality, which makes no sense. So that gives you divine simplicity right there, right? It's this pure, fully actual reality with no limits, no boundaries, no restrictions.
So you were reading Clark and other Thomists for their metaphysics,
right?
Not caring whether or not they were Christian at this point.
I was good at ignoring Christianity for a while. I remember admitting that to another friend that... and it was funny, because it wasn't like I was even deliberately trying to ignore it. Like, I just glossed over it. Like, even with Thomas. Like, I was just easily able to just be interested in the philosophy. Not like this is they're dumb or anything like that. It was just very easy for me to I just want the philosophy. It was very easy for me to think, I just want the philosophy, and I can just...
You know what's interesting? When I was coming to faith, I was about 15, 16 years old, and I was just open, right? Really open and searching for something beyond me, beyond the physical. And so I just started like looking into meditation books and New Age things. But whenever they would use Christian terminology, it immediately turned me off. Like open your mind and open your heart to, if it used the word heaven, I was totally turned off. I don't know why that was. Maybe familiarity breeds contempt sort of thing. My grandma's a Christian, my mum's a Christian. This is all just whatever, trivial. Anyway.
Yeah, I'm trying to think if there was any aversion. I mean, there's definitely some aversion that I had, right, of different strands of Protestantism for various reasons. I was a Protestant before I was Catholic. I shouldn't actually say that. I wasn't really Protestant, right? I explored Protestantism before I became Catholic. And part of it was my wife, actually. So we're kind of like traveling along.
This is fascinating.
Both toward the church, but on separate paths, right? So she was brought up in an agnostic household. She then became very like new agey spiritual, but not religious.
When she was with you?
No, before me. When she met with me, I brought her into I made her an atheist.
Okay.
Right? And then she actually was quite upset with me when I thought that maybe we should start Christianity. And
so you're married at this point?
We're married, right? So we had a kid, and then we got married in a secular way, and then it was a mess. Trying to come into the church with that, but it worked out. Thanks be to God. So yeah, she had a strong aversion to Christianity, and I remember knowing like, okay, if I'm gonna bring this up to my wife, I gotta be delicate about it, right? Gotta be delicate about it. And we actually got to a point where through numerous conversations, her resistance started to break down, and I gave her the reasons, like, hey, here's why I think this is credible. Here's why we should at least think about it. And like, we got kids now, right? And this is another part of the story. It's like, how are we going to raise these kids? And she had the same feeling, right? She's like, I don't know how to teach my kids. I don't know what to anchor it in. So she wasn't ready to hop to Christianity, but she was struggling with.
So do you remember what it was that got you thinking about Christianity then?
It was definitely the philosophers that impressed me that opened me up.
You began to realize this guy's a Christian? Or?
And I was surprised. I was surprised when I discovered, I forget where I discovered it from. Bill Craig was definitely helpful at some point. I don't know if he was the first one. That there was actually a credible historical case to make for Christianity. Like, that was not something I just assumed was never a thing, right? That I wouldn't have been like, Jesus is definitely a myth type of proponent, but I probably believed that. I probably believed that he was some type of mythological or the spiritual guru type of thing, because I just never thought very deeply about it, right? That he was just kind of a Buddha type figure. I did read Mere Christianity at one point. Yeah. That, you get the trilemma there, which gets you thinking, right? Doesn't and
the moral argument, well, you've already made
I'd already been working through that, but it was just interesting to see that that's how he opens Mere Christianity. I think that those are good, because the truth is like, if you ask me my favorite arguments for God, I'm probably going to talk like Norris Clark stuff, right? That, but the moral, it's true that the moral stuff hits you right in the gut, like it did for me. So there's that. So I'm kind of coming in, and I'm kind of converging on Catholicism at this point. I'm thinking, wow, there's a lot of things that seem right about this. Like, it seems to explain a lot of stuff.
Okay, this is. I mean, you got to help us understand how you went from considering Christianity, reading C.S. Lewis. I mean, Catholicism. It feels like there's so many more hurdles to jump for many people. There's just so much more to accept.
Yeah.
Papacy, not the least of them.
See, there were issues that I had, in a sense that the question of authority was an interesting one for me. And part of the reason is, politically, I was once very liberal. Then I became a hardcore libertarian. Yeah. You know how libertarians feel about authority.
Yep.
Not very friendly, right? And now there's something I'm considering that it's kind of big on the authority question, right? Yeah. And that's very interesting to me. I mean, part of it was just kind of knocking out options too, right? So sola scriptura always seemed like a non-starter to me.
And what's interesting to me too is you didn't have the sort of Protestant background that would lead you to immediately dismiss out of prejudice prayers to the saints, priesthood, things like this.
Right, like the Mary stuff, never an issue for me.
Yep, gotcha.
Never an issue. The Pope, never an issue for me. It was just, does it make sense? Is there historical credibility? There was never, and this is something I really appreciate, or try to appreciate, is that we all have our paradigms, right? We all have that kind of lens that we see things through. And Alistair McIntyre, a great Catholic convert himself, he talks about trying to engage in paradigmatic thinking, where it's to really understand a position. Don't just look at it like, don't just analyze the propositions, right? But like, try to step into it. Try and see through that lens. And I obviously haven't lived in every paradigm, but I try to do that. Like why would, now I try to do it anyways. I didn't always try to do it, but like, why would a Protestant feel this way about Mary or the Pope? And I think I understand that. I think I really do understand that. But I didn't have that issue, so that wasn't for me. The idea of a hierarchical structure makes sense. It seems befitting of human nature. We're social animals. Tradition fits well with that. Sola Scriptura it just seemed like a non-starter, right? You don't have an inspired table of contents. No book can compile itself. No book can interpret itself. And we have huge disagreements about all the stuff that's in Scripture. So it seems like we need another mechanism of some sort, right? So these things were all sense-making to me. It seemed to fit. There's typology. We were talking about that a little bit before the show. Typology wasn't something that totally. It was cumulative, right?
Yep.
So it was just like, here's a weight in the scale. There's another weight. There's another weight. And maybe there's a weight in the scale for Catholicism is actually just that I don't think something else works.
Yeah.
So, and then just reading the earliest Christians, right? When you read Clement, Ignatius, Irenaeus, and not just looking for the papacy, which is quite distinctive, but you would read things that really seemed like a commitment to the real presence. You'd hear about them talking about altars. Like, what is an altar for? Well, it's for a sacrifice. Right. And these were things that seemed very much in line with the Catholic Church, but not in line with. We were going both to a non-denominational and Lutheran.
Oh, interesting.
Right. So we're kind of like camping out at different places. And part of that was because when I was first talking to my wife about this, she finally got to the point. She's like, okay, I'll consider becoming Christian, but no way in hell am I ever becoming Catholic.
What was her biggest roadblock?
Her family actually is largely ex-Catholic. So there's something there, right? That just got handed down about the negativity of the Catholic faith in her family. Yeah. And then she just growing up in the South as a not Christian.
That's funny though, because I would have thought that if she had turned on Christianity, the Christianity of her youth, that maybe now she'd be open to something just not that Southern style Christianity.
Yeah, I guess it was a version from two different angles, right? She had the Southern style Christianity, which was off-putting to her. Should let her speak for herself at some point. But then also her family having left the faith and having just largely, it seemed like, negative things to say about it as she was growing up. Yeah, gave her a foul impression.
Yeah, that's fair.
So I was kind of, intellectually, I was kind of, veering Catholic pretty strongly at this point.
What Catholic books or apologetics were you consuming, if any, at the time?
The one thing that really got my wife was Bishop Barron's Catholicism series.
Oh, it's excellent.
Before, what was I doing at that point? Well, I was reading these philosophers that I mentioned, right? And once I was seriously starting to consider Catholicism, I read a lot on the historical credibility for the resurrection, because that's obviously a linchpin. So that's, Bill Craig's got a book called The Sunrise, which is good. N.T. Wright's got a book. Brent Petrie's got a book. So tried to see, is there a credible basis there? I didn't need it proved, like mathematically. I just needed to see is it plausible? Because once you kind of get to theism, right, your prior worldview causes you to interpret things differently, right? So, like, given that I had already come to believe in God and that He's good, it seems like something went seriously wrong in the world. Something like the incarnation and atonement just kind of makes sense. It's a smaller
jump.
It kind of just makes sense, right? So the fact that there's like a basis there historically for it, it's fitting. It's fitting. Yeah. It presents itself as a very plausible and rational option. So yeah, if you press me on all the historical stuff, I'm not an apologist.
Yeah.
But,
well, the fact that Catholic apologetics has largely been concerned with Protestant objections, at least up until the recent past, with the sort of new atheist movement that's not so new anymore. Right. And so, given the fact that you didn't have a lot of questions about indulgences or authority or Mary, that would probably explain why perhaps you never turned to many modern Catholic apologists.
Yeah, and the authority is a big one. So I think if you can get, so for Catholics, I kind of see it, the apologetic project is broken up into three things, right? You have this God exists, and there you're speaking to atheists and agnostics, skeptics in the general sense. Then is Jesus God? That's the middle pillar, right? And there you're talking to people who might be spiritual but not religious, or different religions. And then you've got did Christ give us the Catholic Church,
Yeah.
right? And is that church really is it an authoritative thing in a sense? And I think once you can answer the question of authority, if you can answer it, and I think you can, you don't have to work through everything else, right? I didn't need to work through the indulgence thing, because like whatever the case is there, and now like, it doesn't mean you get lazy and ignorant, but like, look, the history of the Catholic Church is huge. No way am I going to be able to parse through every single detail of this, right? I'm just not going to do it. Can I get enough reasons, considerations, evidence that will cause me to assent and say, yes, this is true, that I can then trust that God is really guiding his church? And that if difficulties arise, if they're serious enough, then I'll eventually go look into it.
This is a really interesting point, and I'd love you to talk about this a little bit more for those who are watching who are on the sort of precipice of accepting Catholicism or something else. This idea that we're so kind of anxious about the fact that we may throw our lives into something that ends up being false.
Right.
And what you just said there is, I can't possibly go through the whole history of Catholicism. I have to know enough so that I can then trust.
Right.
Talk about that a bit.
Yeah, I would love to. I think this plays not just into Catholicism, but Christianity as well. I think there's kind of like the general big ticket questions, right? The hinge points. Like, these are the things you really got to figure out. And there's a parallel here to the resurrection, right? Like, if Christ really did walk out of his tomb, whatever other issues you have with Christianity, probably you can work through those, right? So, like, let's keep the main things the main thing, right? If Christ really did found the Catholic Church, and this is God's church, and God is protecting his church, you know, I've heard people, you know, say, I'm in various, like, philosophical groups. I try not to spend too much time on social media, but some people are resistant to becoming Catholic because they have issues with divine simplicity, say, or something like that, right?
Yeah. That's one of Cameron Batuzzi's arguments.
Oh, Cameron's a good guy.
Yeah. He's okay.
I had him on my show a long time ago, like when I was, Anyway, hello to Cameron.
Yeah.
And what I want to say to that is that's a difficult thing to think about first off, right? But it's not a unique difficulty. And can we spend a few minutes on this? Because I think
on divine simplicity?
Well, the general point, and then we can talk about divine simplicity, right? Because you might be talking to a Muslim, and they might have issues with the Trinity. And they say, I would become Christian, but I can't get, the Trinity doesn't make any sense to me. Probably a Protestant would say, well, let's focus on the resurrection.
Yeah, I like that analogy.
Right? And here's the thing, like, because if Christ really walked out of his tomb, and you could even concede, like, look, I don't really get the Trinity either. It's difficult.
Yes.
But I can maybe at least show you it's not incoherent.
Yes.
And then let's focus on this thing, and that should be the deciding factor. I would say the same thing with Catholicism. Like, divine simplicity is difficult. I don't think it's incoherent. I think we can defend it. Maybe I can't work out every little nook and cranny, but if we can, you know, give good arguments that Christ really did give us a church, hierarchical, unified, right? Then we should join it, right? And then we can. It doesn't mean we can't still look into divine simplicity, but some things are clearer than others. Some things kind of present themselves as a little bit more important than other things.
Yes.
And that's the way I would
like
approach that.
I think that's a really good way of thinking of it.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, he thinks the two it's actually an incoherent belief, divine simplicity. But I see your point.
Right.
That it's like, for the Muslim, if you accept Christ's resurrection, then you can go down the road of the Trinity. Likewise, if you accept papal infallibility,
right,
then we can work on divine simplicity next, but that's going to be,
Right. Yeah, and talking with many Protestants with divine simplicity, and first off, it's not just a Catholic thing, like many Protestants affirm divine simplicity. I had two very long conversations on this, both on my show recently with Dr. Gavin Kerr and on another good show, the Classical Theism podcast with John DeRosa.
Yeah,
so if people want to go in the weeds in that, I'd say check those out. But there's different starting points, and I think that this is important to understand, right? So when I was kind of coming as a skeptic, metaphysics really appealed to me because I was kind of looking for what's the ultimate explanation of things, right?
Right.
And I think a lot of people who come from Scripture start not by looking for an ultimate explanation, but looking for an ultimate person. And so they take the idea of God as a person. Well, we're persons. Let's start stripping away limits, right? Well, God doesn't have a body. Let's fill out God's knowledge with only and all true propositions. And so you kind of like get some big mighty thing.
Yeah.
But that big mighty thing doesn't seem to me like the ultimate metaphysical explanation of things, right? But if you're starting metaphysically and you're kind of carving reality at its joints,
fascinating.
And you're like, okay, how do we make sense of the problem of change or the problem with the one and the many? And then you start discovering these distinctions between act potency or later essence and existence. And then you start to hunt down the path of intelligibility, well, then it seems to me like it's divine simplicity or bust, right? Because we have these categories of things that stand in need of an explanation, right? We have composites, for example, of essence and existence, and composite things require a cause beyond themselves. We have contingent things with a real distinction. We have things which move from potentiality to actuality, right? So in order to make sense of these certain categories of things, to make sense of why there's any potentiality at all, we're going to have to get to pure actuality. To make sense of why there's any compositeness at all, we're going to have to get to absolutely simple being. So we have to transcend these categories for ultimate explanations, right? And when we do that, we're going to get something that is categorically different, right? That is purely actual, kind of as we sketched out with the Clark argument before, that is utterly simple, non-composite, right? And whose essence just is existence, that God is to be, to be. Now, when you do that, you get to something that might at first seem spooky and aloof.
Right.
But we have other moves to show that no, this being actually has intellect, has will, is personal, right? Is the reason that any of us exist at all. But we don't start by looking for the ultimate person. We start by looking for the ultimate explanation. And you also have to understand the tools the metaphysician is using, such as proceeding apophatically and analogically. So, you know, sometimes people are worried, and it's a legitimate concern of with simplicity and you know, making certain predications of God, if God is all-knowing and all-powerful. Well, aren't these distinct things? But in God, you're saying they're the same thing, right? This is the kind of multiple properties objection. That just seems like annoying nonsense, right?
Yes.
And this is where we have to...
It's a great way to put it.
We have to... like, again, I try to appreciate that. Like, I can see, like, why would somebody think that? And it makes sense, given that there's different starting points and approaches. But if you're moving along like Thomas does, and you're moving apophatically, you're striking away the things God is not material, not composed, blah, 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 right? But then also we make positive attributions of God, because we're moving from effect to ultimate cause, and whatever is in the effect must in some way be in the cause, right? In some way. Then when we say that there's power and knowledge in God, we mean that analogically, right? There's something like power in God. There's something like knowledge in God. And that God's power and God's knowledge, those things are the same, but we can still affirm that knowledge and power in us are distinct. Now, all that is, you know, a huge can of worms that we may or may not want to open, but it's just, in order to, I think, fairly evaluate divine simplicity, it's very important you don't just start at the conclusion. What is the process that leads up to it? And same thing, like, there's different models of divine simplicity, too, so you might find one utterly implausible. There's certainly ones that I reject, but then there might be other ones that you find attractive.
Yeah, okay. Hey, you said something which I want you to defend. I know Aquinas does. The idea that if something's composite, it requires a prior cause to bring it together. Why think that's true?
Right. So if there's an object that's composed, it presupposes its parts in existence, at the very least, right?
It presupposes...
Right.
It presupposes what?
Its parts.
Sure.
Right. So take a simple example here, like a chair or something like that, or even me. I have parts.
Yeah. It's almost synonymous. To be composed is to have parts.
Yeah. So right. And it's not just the existence of the parts that's important, but it's the arrangement and function of the parts as well.
Yeah.
Right. I can't be the cause of what I'm presupposing, right? But my parts also, you know, they constitute me, right? So we'd have an explanatory vicious circle if we didn't get outside of the composed object.
And say that again. I went too fast.
We would have an explanatory vicious circle.
Yeah, but how?
If we tried to explain the whole in terms of the parts, but the parts in terms of the whole, because the parts are also part of the whole. Think of like a chair, right? Yeah. Right? How would a chair come together? Well, this is a pretty easy one. Somebody put it together, right? But it only stays together because certain other things are operative at the same time. Temperature, friction forces, electromagnetism, right? You start, so it's not just that somebody put it together. There's things that hold it together, right? Now, expand that out, you can go metaphysically, so you can go matter and form. Yeah. I think the easier one to think with is as essence and existence, right? With Aquinas, right? Yeah. So any finite, qualitatively finite thing exists only insofar as existence is imparted to it, right? Yes. So if there's a real distinction, like I don't own existence, right? It's given to me, it's donated to. That's what Aquinas means by a real distinction. Well, we need something that I don't want to say mushed them together, right? But trying to keep the language simple. Otherwise, you have something like imparting existence to itself, and in which sense it would have to pre-exist itself, and in which case, why would it need to impart existence to itself? So to avoid these type of explanatory vicious circles, depending any way you want to look at it, right? Physically, metaphysically, you're gonna have to get beyond those categories altogether. You recently had Josh Rasmussen on. If I can give him a shout out, he's got a really cool argument called the argument from limits.
Yes.
So and I think it's very close to the real distinction, just coming at it from a different way, right? Where he says that you look at a limited thing, right? This iPhone has a particular shape, right? Why does it have that shape, right? Yeah. Why does it have those limits instead of any other limits? And he's actually very similar to Clark too, right? We reach these limits, and what do limits do? Limits point out to an external explanation, right? Always beyond themselves. Well, can we keep pointing out? Can we keep pointing out, keep pointing out, keep pointing out? Or do we have to explode all the limits at some point? Yes. Do we have to get beyond all restrictions, all boundaries, right? So if we do that and we get to the unbounded, the unrestricted, the qualitatively infinite, pure actuality, right? We have moved beyond, we're at something categorically different. And in that sense, it's so different. It doesn't mean we can't say anything about it. But I don't think we should be surprised if it's a little bit spooky. You know what I mean?
Given that it transcends all the categories we interact with,
So that was another thing that was never really an issue for me is sometimes people object to the way Aquinas thinks about God or the Catholic faith it's too strange.
Yeah.
That wasn't an issue for me. But I can appreciate why it would be an
I
issue.
love what you said earlier, that most of us, as the Christian who now wants to find arguments for God's existence, they basically think of a person, and then they add to it they take away the finite properties, and that's really interesting to me. But as you say, for you...
I hope I'm not caricaturing the other side, but that seems to
but I can see how that would be the case for some people, at least.
Right. I mean,
whereas for you began on the opposite end.
Right.
And then once you've accepted that uncaused cause, then you can look at the arguments that give it knowledge, power, seen through different lenses.
So it's funny when you come from different perspectives, right? It's because divine simplicity actually made a lot of sense for me, and the Catholic Church so boldly affirms it. Yeah. That was actually a credibility thing for the Catholic faith for me, rather than again. So it goes to show, like, depending where you're coming from, like, kind of a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah.
Like it could.
A moment ago, you talked about different types of simplicity, and I know the Church says we must believe God's simple, but you talked about there are different versions of divine simplicity you reject.
Right.
Would you tell us what's the bare minimum we have to accept, to your knowledge? And if you can't do it, that's okay.
I probably would have to, in terms of for the Church, I would have to punt. I don't know.
Okay, that's fine.
And I don't know if I've heard a good answer of that.
Then what is the versions of simplicity you reject?
I'll tell you the one that I like the most. Okay. And it would be great thinker. I think somebody I wish would be more well-known. W. Matthews Grant, Dr. W. Matthews Grant. He's got a book. Yeah. It's an excellent book called Human Freedom and God's Universal Causality, or something like that. And he's trying to reconcile those two things, right? That's his main project, is how do we reconcile libertarian freedom and divine universal causality, because there seems like a superficial tension there. But then he puts out a model called the extrinsic model of divine simplicity in that book. And he's building off of the scholastic project of mixed relations, what Aquinas holds, that God has a rational relation to us, we have a real relation to God. Given that and divine universal causality, comes up with what's called the extrinsic model of divine simplicity. So if people are interested in the model that I like the best, it would be that one, and we could talk details if we want. There's also another book that kind of surveys models by a philosopher named Jay Richards, and I think it's called The Untamed God, if I remember rightly. And that's a good book, because he kind of goes through, I think if I remember rightly, he goes through like 4 to 6 maybe different models of divine simplicity. He takes issue with a number of them.
It's a great name.
And then he's a good thinker. I like Jay a lot. I think I probably diverge with him on the model he settles on. Okay. But presumably they're both acceptable within the circles of Catholic orthodoxy.
Before we get to questions here, and for those who are watching right now in the live chat, we are going to start taking questions, so have them ready. But at least kind of let's, I don't mean to rush you, but wrap up the story as to how you became Catholic and what that was like.
So yeah, I was actually kind of like sneaking off the Catholic Mass before my wife was. I love it. I would go to a coffee shop in the morning and kind of do my work because I just work from my computer, and there was a Catholic mass right down the street. I would go, and it was a beautiful thing. And in fact, actually, it was Christmas Eve one night. I'll tell this story very quickly, just because, again, just to show it's not all or even mostly intellectual. I just had this deep pull to go to mass.
Yep.
And this was before I was sneaking to it. So I started sneaking to mass after this first experience. And it was snowing outside, and it was horrendous weather. And I told my wife, I'm like, I think I have to go to that Catholic church down the street. I think I just have to go. And she just gave me the whatever you need to do, right?
Yeah.
And I go, and it was the most beautiful thing, right? I'm not a feelings person. Like, I never have like spiritual experiences.
Okay.
I'm like just very dry.
Okay.
But that was the closest I've ever came, right? Specifically,
if you were to look back
when the
now,
priest held up the Eucharist, Matt,
Right.
was like when something hit me. No, I knew then at that moment that this is where I need to be.
if you were to look back now, would you say that was a beautiful liturgy, or was it just a run-of-the-mill?
It was a beautiful liturgy, and it was. I was very fortunate because that parish was a very, very old Gothic-looking thing. It was in Westchester, Pennsylvania. It was a Guma Shadow. It was St. Agnes Parish, and it's just a beautiful old. I think it was built in the 1700s, maybe. It's like one of the oldest in that area. Just beautiful and just exceedingly dark. Is in like not a lot of light, but the stained glass and the candles.
Beautiful.
And the beauty was a huge element, but the reverence at the Eucharist, the homily was incredible. I don't even remember it. I remember I almost shed a tear, which for me is significant, right? Yeah. So yes, it was exceedingly beautiful. I don't know what would have happened if I would have went into some like tinny drum kit type of mass. But that isn't where God let me go. So, you know.
So then, okay. And how did you get, through the RCIA, presumably? Or?
That's exactly it. So fast forward a little bit, get the wife on board, and like I said, she worked her own way through. And we're both.
Did she have an objection to any of the Catholic moral teachings, say to contraception or something like that? And did you?
Yes. Well, again, natural. Here is another marker for Catholicism: is natural law seemed like the best ethical theory in the market, as far as I could tell.
Yeah.
And seeing that the Catholic Church upheld that. Now, look, that doesn't mean I was following it. So intellectually, I was there, but I was living a life quite contrary to that, right? And so was my wife, and we both were. And I didn't resolve all that stuff before I became Catholic, but by God's grace, He helped me. Obviously, we still have our shortcomings in many respects, right?
Yeah.
But He helped me get rid of a lot of that stuff, a lot of the most significant stuff, and almost like that, right?
Oh my God.
And especially the sexual stuff, right? So we go to RCIA. The church tries to figure out our situation with being married outside of the church and kids, and it was all figured out. And I was confirmed, and then Christine was baptized and confirmed at a beautiful Easter vigil, and we got all the kids baptized. So we got the whole.
Glory to
We
God.
had 3 at that time. Mm-hmm.
How did your parents and her parents, if you don't mind me asking, that might be too personal, I'm not sure, but how did they take it?
I think her family was more surprised than mine. Mine seemed
Good.
More of my friends were like, "What are you doing, man?
Yeah.
What's going on here?" Her family, she was very, very nervous to tell her family because there was a strong anti-religious attitude. But it's been good.
Yeah.
It's been good. They're not Catholic, but it's been good. I can't really say too many. It wasn't as bumpy as we were expecting. I'll say that.
Okay, well, we might get into some of this in the questions. I'm sure people will have questions about your particular conversion and things like that. But before we do that, and if you're watching right now, do us a favor, hit that like button. If you're enjoying this interview, do us a favor and share it, because that helps YouTube evangelize. And it's always good to help Google evangelize. But before we do that, I want to say thank you to our sponsor, Catholic Chemistry. I used to work at Catholic Answers, and one of my co-workers was a bloke by the name of Chuck Gallucci. And the two of us would talk about our plans for the future, and he said he wanted to create the best Catholic dating site. And just a couple of years ago, he launched it, and it's really fantastic. And so I would highly recommend that you check that out. If you go into the description below and click that link for Catholic Chemistry and sign up today. It's the fastest growing Catholic dating site on the web. They have inbuilt video chats, so you don't have to give out your number or anything like that. People are very serious who come on. I think they even have to say kind of what their preference is as far as liturgy and things like this. So if you are single and you're open to marriage and you've been maybe wanting to date but haven't been having any luck in this COVID period, click that link below and sign up today. CatholicChemistry.com. CatholicChemistry.com. All right, this is fantastic. Okay, are you aware of the folks at Real Atheology?
Yeah, I think I have to do a podcast.
Yeah, we had one of those blokes on to debate Gregory Pine.
Right.
At one point.
Yeah.
Very respectful guys, very intelligent guys. Anyway, they said, awesome to see Pat on this podcast.
Well, thanks, guys.
His podcast is great too.
Well,
we would love to hear from Pat, who he feels are the best defenders of philosophical atheism.
Sure.
And the best books defending atheism from his perspective.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, let me first say that I don't actually get a chance to listen to a lot of podcasts. So, because I'm always recording them, right? Unless it's Matt. So can I answer this in two ways? I'll answer this some who are my favorite and who I think are the best. I kind of answer my favorite. I'll never get tired of reading Nietzsche, ever. I don't think he's the most rigorous, right? Like, if you're looking for like good. Let me first say that I don't actually get a chance to listen to a lot of podcasts. So, because I'm always recording them, right? Unless it's Matt. So can I answer this in two ways? I'll answer this some who are my favorite and who I think are the best. I kind of answer my favorite. I'll never get tired of reading Nietzsche, ever. I don't think he's the most rigorous, right? Like, if you're looking for like good analytic philosophy or something like that. I just always enjoy reading him. And I think he's prophetic and important in many ways, even if I don't go with him on like his genealogy of morals or something like that. I wrote a post not too long ago, which somebody commented on recently very kindly, and I think that they themselves are not religious, called "The Case for Religion and Especially Catholicism." It's a sloppy blog post, but it's on my website if you want to check it out. And in there, I named the three atheists that I think are probably the most formidable: J.L. Mackie, John Howard Sobel, and Graham Oppie. And I don't know if you're going to get much more rigorous than that. And I'd be curious if those guys agree to that. So yeah, Miracle Theism, Logic and Theism, and Arguing Gods would be three books to start. Now look, if you're not trained in this stuff and like you're a believer, like you don't go into those books right? You're not coming out of those books unless you're seriously engaged in like
I just got Oppie's little book on atheism.
In like the philosophy of religion, right? So that's something you got to be like battle ready to go. But you know what? I said this on a podcast with John the other day as we were working through some more of the I guess more technical objections to simplicity and stuff like that. And the way I've seen it and the way I saw it back when I was an atheist and the way I try to see it now. Now we have to, faith is also a gift, so that's there and we can't put that aside. But objections are a good thing, right? Difficulties are a good thing because they can help us reach to a deeper understanding, which is the mind wants, and they can cause us to abandon superficial views and
in a way, I think that's what the new atheism has done for many Christians today.
Right.
I mean, the sort of rise of William Lane Craig was in response to people like Richard Dawkins, who are essentially asking things like, well, who created God? Right. Which may have been a question that would have stumped the majority of thinking Christians 20 years ago, but today we've thought about these things, even if it's just a matter of having watched a Dr. William Lane Craig debate. Yeah, and that's interesting because I obviously think it's a very bad objection, but it has force in as much as I constantly see it repeated, even on my videos and stuff like that. And so yeah, I mean, like, well, what can that do? What can that do? Who caused God? Just give an example, right? Who caused God? What can that objection do if it rattles you? Well, it can cause you to wonder if any argument rides on the premise that everything has a cause to begin with, right? And that's a good thing to consider. Does everything have a cause? Yeah. Well, according to Norris Clark, no. He starts from the opposite. He says that not everything have a cause. Otherwise, you wind up at absurdity. And that's a wonderful insight, right? That's a wonderful thing to gain clarity on. Not just that the objection is misguided, but it gets you to think more deeply about the structure of reality and how things are. So even a simple objection like that sometimes we might just not take seriously, it could be fruitful. Another question here from Cobber. Thank you for your super chat. He says this, and let's see if we can understand this, because it looks like a little complicated. When assessing theory X, if theory X implies Y, which is false, then theory X is probably false, maybe definitely false. If Catholicism implies that old church teachings are true, and I'm skeptical of any detail of teachings, how can I come to believe?
Yeah, that's a really
Great
good question, right? So you got a model, right? And say the model predicts something, right? Say it predicts X, but you think not X, right? Well, then it would seem like not X counts as evidence against your model, right? That sounds like it's kind of what he's saying, right? Maybe we could use an example here with the problem of evil, right? Because sometimes it's thought that if God exists, that would predict that there wouldn't be evil, right? But we think that, but there's evil in the world.
Yeah.
So does that count against the hypothesis that God exists? And that's kind of like a softened version, right? We're not saying that there's maybe a logical contradiction between God and evil, but like if God exists, then maybe more probably than not, we would predict more of a perfect world or a perfect world. There is such a thing like that, right? And so let's think through this, and then maybe we can go back and answer his question, because I think it's going to come down to weights and a scale at the end of the day, right? It's going to come down to more than just one consideration, as it did for me, because there were some things with the church that I wasn't sure on, but there was enough of the other stuff that depressed the scales that caused me to want to go reevaluate is my commitment to this actually right? That would be my short answer to him. But even for evil, bring up Josh Rasmussen again. He's got a nice little paper on this where he says, I hope I don't do injustice to his project, but he'll say something like this. What worldview better predicts evil when you really take the time to think about it? Would it be a physicalism? Well, it's hard to make sense of that, because in order to make sense of evil, we need some type of moral standard. And then we need moral communities, conscious moral beings that can reflect on the moral standard and engage in reasoning and this or that. It's hard to see how you're going to get any of that from just shapes and motion, right? Some people might even think it's just impossible to get something like that, like to traverse those categories would just be impossible, right? But certainly it doesn't seem very probable. Now, what if you have a perfect foundation, supreme being itself, right? And especially as classical theists hold that goodness and being are convertible, right? Well, now we got a perfect foundation, so it seems like we got a standard in place. Might God have good reasons to create rational agents? Seems very plausible, right? So now the things that evil is contingent upon, right? So evil itself is contingent upon a moral standard, moral communities. These actually are better explained by theism, and very difficult to explain on certain brands of naturalism, if not atheism outright. So in that sense, evil, upon a deeper consideration, seems to actually point more in the direction of theism than just using the framework that he's bringing up here than atheism. So, and this was kind of a theme that I found, actually, is that superficial tensions I had with Catholicism, and superficial doesn't mean like they're weak arguments, there's an initial tension. The longer I thought about them, usually led to deeper concord, deeper harmony. So to go back to his very good question, I would say, for me, there was enough wins in the Catholic box already that the places where I was in tension about, and I don't remember off the top of my head, but I do remember there were certain places. The church already had been right so many more times than me that I'm like, okay, maybe I'm wrong. Yeah. Maybe I'm wrong on this, so let me go reevaluate.
You mentioned those three poles earlier: God's existence, Christianity, Catholicism. I wrote a paper a while back about sort of the apologetics mansion, I called it. You have these three levels, right?
Oh, that's good, I like that.
Yeah, so the evangelist, the apologist wants to bring you to the summit or to the peak of the mansion. And it's true that God can reveal himself to you in a way that you come to believe Catholicism to be true in a moment. But if you were to think about it sequentially, and you suppose you were thinking of this mansion, and then perhaps there are people sitting around the grass by the mansion. These might be atheists. Well, to shout out from the third-story window, that would be Catholicism is true, about transubstantiation to someone sitting on the grass, that would be like trying to explain algebra to somebody who denies basic arithmetic.
That's good.
So my only point here is, he says, when assessing theory X, if X implies Y, and you've got good reason to think Y is false, but you don't have to kind of buy the whole thing at once. As you did, you can come to believe in an uncaused cause without thinking it's personal right away. You can come to believe in a personal uncaused cause, but Christianity might not be true. This is sort of like when people have terrible, these big objections to the Bible. And you think, okay, well, maybe the Bible's false or just, a human artifact and nothing more. But that wouldn't prove that God doesn't exist, That can be a helpful way.
Yeah, I think that's an excellent... I like the point with transubstantiation. I mean, I could... Oh my gosh, I hope I would never start a conversation off with that, right? It's just like...
Well, that's right. But
almost everybody's probably going to think that that's false, right?
But it is true, though, that some atheists will begin with that. Like, they'll say, look, you believe in transubstantiation? Yeah, I get that it's weird, especially if you don't hold that God exists. If you don't hold God exists, of course it seems ridiculous.
And if you don't hold like a general like scholastic metaphysics as well, right? There's just a lot that kind of like leads up to that you would want to have in place before you even start to bring a subject like that up.
Ash Awesome, probably not his real name, says, do either of you see the youth of this age, 18 or younger, becoming more God-centric or atheist-centric in matters such as purpose of life and morals?
Do you want me to go first on this?
Well, the first thing that comes to my mind is just how incredibly enthusiastic the quote-unquote social justice crowd are. Like, it would seem obviously true that, at least if you look at the media, that racism is at least something that's evil.
Right.
That people are pretty moralistic about how we should be living and who should be banned and why.
Right.
And so in that sense, anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting because our culture is superficially relativist, but not really.
Right.
Right. And I think that's what you're saying, right? Is we have these sort of I guess these narratives about, we shouldn't judge, and then people make judgments about people judging, and this kind of ironic stuff, right? But in terms of what I've seen, it actually, I'd be curious your experience, Matt, because you're much more engaged, I guess, in the kind of Catholic conversation online. But like my Instagram inbox is like filled with like stuff from like young men, like young college-age men who are very interested, very engaged. Some of them skeptical. So there's, which kind of surprised me because I honestly didn't know what to expect. Because like I said, my journey to Catholicism was kind of like, it's kind of solo, right? I didn't like have a community that was moving with. And in fact, when I got into the church, like I'd go to like a men's group and it was like everybody there was like twice my age, and that was. But I've grown more optimistic from what I've seen online. The youth, and there's, I guess, a benefit there because if you're going to be young and going and really being Catholic, you're going to be challenged from so many different angles that you're probably going to have to really investigate the faith, right? If you're serious about it at this point. It's not such a cultural force anymore that you can kind of just be a nominal Catholic. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think, in a way, Jordan Peterson, before his illness, sort of took the baton from the new atheists, who are now the old atheists, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
And they may have sort of overshot, and he was able to kind of come in and kind of talk about the scriptures, even from an evolutionary standpoint, a psychological standpoint, that really appealed to people, and at least helped them see the value of religion and seeing order in the world and the beauty and helpfulness of stories in their own life. And that at least sort of maybe dulled the kind of hard-edged atheism that the quote-unquote new atheists brought about.
Right.
I found that interesting.
I think you're exactly right. I think Jordan Peterson and God's providence was that necessary mediating factor for a lot of people. Right? If you imagine like Sam Harris sitting down, say, with a Catholic bishop, right? Probably most of people following Sam Harris would just want nothing to do with the religious side of the argument. But Peterson, coming from a secular perspective, but giving a perspective on the Bible that wasn't completely hostile, seemed to soften a lot of people to, okay, maybe there's more here than I initially thought. And I know because I've had people who've messaged me and emailed me say, it's Peterson who opened me up to this stuff. So he really is a bridge for a lot of people. So I see him as, and I pray for him too. It seems
I need to buy his new book.
It seems like man, I don't know. I don't like to make predictions about other people, but it just seems to me like he might.
I agree.
Yeah, you see what I'm saying?
What do you think though about? It feels a little dirty when every Catholic YouTuber kind of capitalizes on him talking about Jesus and crying about it. I don't mean dirty, and I'm not.
Oh, those
I'm
clips
not,
that are just going
yes,
around.
Exactly.
Oh, yeah,
and I'm
I've
not
seen those,
imputing the motives of these Catholic
Uh-huh.
YouTubers. I think it's fine that they're addressing it, and maybe I'll even address it. It's good. We're addressing it now.
Right.
But you know, it does feel a bit dirty when you get the sense that we want him on our team.
That is a great point, and I was always kind of off-put from that, and I would highly recommend not doing that unless somebody really is on your team, right? And the reason being is if there's like a cool person out there, and you try and get
Jim
them on your team,
Gaffigan.
and you find like one quote or one clip from that person, like, oh look, they're on my side, and then somebody investigates them, and they're like, actually, no, they're not really on your side. You're going to lose a lot of credibility doing something like that. So, yeah,
well, I do think that's true of Jim Gaffigan and other sort of
I don't know
celebrity
enough about him.
Catholics who were Catholic, were even somewhat proud of their Catholicism, and then might come and speak about homosexual marriage or transgenderism in a positive light. You're like, yeah.
And it's, I don't know. I guess I'm okay with if there's not as many. I mean, I don't know if people think that I'm a cool person or not. But I just, what are the reasons, right? If we have some cool people on our team, great. I pray that Jordan Peterson, he seems pretty cool to me, becomes Catholic.
Yeah.
That would be awesome. But yeah, we shouldn't be like saying like, look at he's one. I mean, he's clearly thinking through things, right? And you know, I honestly don't know enough about him. I did read his first book and I enjoyed it.
Well, I just had Jonathan Pajot, who is an Orthodox icon carver and an Orthodox Christian, on my show a couple of months ago. And Jonathan was just on Peterson's podcast last week.
Oh, really?
And this is where Peterson spoke about, even teared up, talking about Christ, and posted an image of St. Michael on his Twitter feed, something to the effect of when words fail, St. Michael defend us.
Wow.
I mean, it's, Lord Jesus
I mean,
Christ.
it looks like something is at work in him.
Yeah.
You know, and he suffered a lot too, and it just goes to show, you know, that the purpose that suffering can serve, even if it doesn't seem like it's serving any purpose at that time, right? Yeah. If anyone wants a good book on suffering, Eleanor Stump's 'Wandering in Darkness is just a masterpiece.
Good.
I have to put that one out there for people.
I've had her on the show before.
Have you really? Yeah, she's brilliant. Yeah, I love her. She's a big influence. Yeah. Yeah. Groovy.
Glory to God, man. All right, let's go see how many questions we have here.
If I can give Stump another plug real quick, she's also got an excellent little book, thin, called The God of the Philosopher and the God of the Bible. So if people are just interested in that project of reconciliation, it's a very good book.
Yeah, that kind of reminds you of Pascal, right? I want the God of the Bible, not the God of the philosophers.
Right, she's going to say they're the same.
They're the same thing, Pascal. Yeah. Well, I'm looking for questions. I don't think we have many more.
All right, easy night. Thanks for tuning in, everyone. I hope that
this has been great. Your podcast is called what?
It is called The Pat Flynn Show. The humbly and originally named Pat Flynn Show. And my website is chroniclesofstrength.com.
Yeah.
So if we're not talking this type of thing, we're usually talking like swinging kettlebells and whatnot.
Glory to God, man. Well, thank you for being on the show. I really
Matt
appreciate
Frad,
it. Thank
pleasure.
you for being here.
Thank you.
All right. See you later. And thanks to everybody in the live stream.